Hellblade made me think quite a lot, and one of the things it made me think about was DMC, Devil May Cry. Ninja Theory created this personal journey through psychosis in Hellblade, but they also did the character action classic Capcom franchise reboot in DMC, Devil May Cry, and both of these games kind of seem at odds with each other. I remember Devil May Cry getting a negative reaction at the time of release because of the reimagining of Dante, the main character. It also got knocked down for having a combat system that wasn't as in-depth as the rest of the series. But when I played it, I remember enjoying it. So I thought I'd play it through for a bit of a retrospective. My name is Billy, and this is Diginauts. Trying to remember if DMC was any good, so some spoilers here maybe. The original Devil May Cry actually had some origins with Resident Evil 4, but during production they realised that it had detoured away from this franchise into making something quite different. Instead of just releasing it as a Resident Evil game, a new series was created. The focus was taken away from tank controls to something where you have a higher fidelity of control over your character. It became more about understanding the combat systems and the enemies. Along with this, it had its own brand of ridiculousness and a real over-the-top style, each game seeming to one-up itself from the next. It was honestly a lot of fun, if a little non-interactive in places, leaving you to watch the action sequences instead of being a part of them. But it managed to straddle that fine line between silly and pretty cool. The characters were not really usually much to write home about, but it was still a good time overall. Forward on 5 years and Ninja Theory got the reboot. Looking back through their releases, this was the first one of them I actually played, but from what they've previously done you can see why they were chosen. Enslaved and Heavenly Sword were both fairly well received games in the character action genre, making them a decent fit for DMC. But they changed Dante. At the time I wasn't really following video games too heavily, but even I remember the backlash that came against them for the redesign, but I'll get into that in a bit. DMC Devil May Cry opens up with Dante being cool. Well, what a teenager would probably idolise as being cool. Fucking dancers from a club and drinking whiskey in the morning. I can sometimes see why this backlash existed against this sort of angsty character. But you are quickly taken into limbo, the demon realm that coexists with our reality, and you got to escape. This is where you're contacted by Kat, who with her guiding hand helps you beat the hunter demon that brings you into limbo and escape from it. And you learn the basics of combat as you go through this. The combat is initially very Devil May Cry. You have a couple of weapons that you might recognise: a sword, rebellion, and ebony and ivory, your two guns. Another key thing to note is that you have your style meter, something present in all DMC games. This will go up as your combo attacks together, and we'll need to change up these combos in order to maintain it. If you take a knock, so will the meter. And at the end of each level you will get judged on this, gaining upgrade points towards different abilities and upgrading what you can do with your weapons. This creates a situation where you are trying to predict what the enemy is going to throw at you whilst keeping your combo up in order to power up more and be better against the enemies. After taking down the hunter demon, you get to the other side and back to our reality, and Kat, after a bit of initial persuasion, takes you to meet the leader of the resistance, Virgil. He invites you to join him, but Dante, the angsty teenager, shrugs him off and says he wants nothing to do with it. But he is eventually persuaded to go to an old mansion. Here you find out about your heritage, half demon, half angel. Turns out Mummy and Daddy were into the opposite biblical species, meaning that you end up a Nephilim. Luckily, it is predicted that the ones able to take down the Demon King Mundus are the Nephilim. You also gain access to your first angel and first devil weapon at this stage. You see, either trigger on the controller becomes a modifier for your combo, bringing out a different weapon to the combat. Firstly, there's the Axe Arbiter. It's a slow but has a huge damage output, and then there is a Cyrus, a fast scythe with a low damage but high attack speed, which is the angelic one. Often the trick to keeping that style meter high is changing between the weapons you have available, so that your combo doesn't get stale and start losing points. On top of this, some weapons are better suited to certain situations, keeping you sort of figuring it out and moving forward with the combat. On top of this, both the angelic weapon and demonic weapon have a platforming power attached to them. The angelic will pull you towards a platform and the devil will pull the platform towards you. Often you have to combine the both of these in these sections, but it's never really about skill, it's just looking what's ahead and punching the right buttons at the right time. Where it does come into its own is the ability to use both of these in combat. It leads you to darting between enemy to enemy, keeping up your combo, or pulling a ranged enemy into close quarters to take them out. It also adds a manoeuvrability to the combat, always keeping on top of the situation and having to dodge out the way and dodge back in, and you also have to manage the enemy's abilities. So in the end it ends up creating this high stakes sort of combat that ends up being super rewarding when you manage to pull it off how you anticipate. After seeing that his mother was killed and had her heart eaten by Mundus, Dante is pretty sold on this idea of killing him and taking down the demons thing. The plan is to draw him out by causing damage to various things close to him or useful to him, and once you do this it will enrage him and making him an easier target to draw out. This is pretty much the point where you find the rhythm to the game. You start to move through a story that pans out in a fairly logical way, with enough happening that it actually keeps your attention. You need to kill 3 lieutenants of the Demon Cabal and then Mundus himself, and even though the story becomes a bit predictable, each of these demons is fucking well worth seeing and they have enough interesting substance to carry you on through. Both of the first 2 demons are bringing a different thing to the Dominion over humanity. One is infecting an energy drink and the other is controlling the news. The whole conspiracy theorist bent could have ended up being a bit laughable, to be honest, and a cynical way of trying to stay edgy. Because they give it such an over-the-top perspective, it really adds up to being this satirical view on this sort of ideology. It's a lot of fun watching them pump a secret demon sauce into energy drink as a way of controlling the populace. Or the way Bob Barbas controls the news in such a heavy-handed way, constantly belittling and berating you, making it so satisfying when you actually get to take him on. He is a great antagonist and represents a new style to Devil May Cry that I want to engage with more. The way he is practically oozing with grease as he airs on TV, the way you physically jump into a TV in Limbo to attack him and take him on. He really is one of the high points of this game and something that makes me wish this series would come back more. Then there's Mundus' mistress Lilith, who controls the local club which actually Dante can be seen in at the beginning of the game. She is pregnant with Mundus' baby, something that's pretty close to the knuckle when it comes to the boss fight. But the level leading up to her is excellent. She is the queen of this club, which she sinks into the ground, leaving you to climb up level after level, almost with this theme of a game show to it, and again, some great level design thematically. But this brings some of the writing and language choices made by the game that just seem odd on closer inspection. The fact Lilith is pregnant with Mundus' baby, a line about her and the world being Mundus' bitch, squirrel semen. Some of the swearing just seems out of place. It just all seems at odds and not complementary to this over-the-top tone. It makes it just feel like it's trying to be edgy and it comes off as angsty, to be honest. This is a shame, but there's enough excellent style and substance elsewhere in the game that it's not a total buzzkill. This is the point where you move on to fight Mundus, who actually becomes the largest boss you have faced so far, and probably one of the weakest in terms of actual gameplay elements. Let's rewind for here 1 second and finish off talking about the combat in the game. By this stage of the game you've increased your arsenal and have another angel weapon, another demon weapon and 2 more guns. This creates quite a diverse set of choices when it comes to the combat, and the game asks you to keep changing it up. I also like the fact that each weapon has the same combo input on the controller, but will have a different effect in the game. This means it's much easier to be reactive with your tools and makes more intense combos more accessible. It may be a point of contention for experienced Devil May Cry fans though, as it is a simpler game overall. But I find I have more agency over the combat encounters because of this. Even I could feel like a fucking badass by the end of the game. And then the game introduces more enemies that are about the waiting game. Waiting for them to expose their weakness. It creates a dynamic that's a lot less interactive. It isn't complicated or difficult to fight these enemies, you just have to be patient and it gets a little bit boring. They also cannot seem to write a boss battle. Yeah, I enjoyed the first 2 for their style and their characterizations, but they fell on the waiting game, just learning their patterns and jumping over them, waiting them to expose a weakness and going in for it. There was no risk reward. All the time it was just about executing dodges instead of having an intense back and forth like Dark Souls. It just ends up feeling rote, especially Mundus and even Virgil, the last boss. Luckily this only really plays into the latter part of the game, and up to there the combat is excellent apart from the bosses. The story comes to an end with Mundus being taken down. Here Virgil states that he wants to step up and rule mankind, which Dante's a little pissed about. Having this from when they were allies and friends and brothers to them turning enemies feels like such a cool setup for an iteration of Devil May Cry to continue. They were mortal enemies in previous games. Dante's hair also changes colour, and I always felt this was a representation of him becoming more similar to the original series. Yes, throughout the majority of this game he's been kind of sarcastic and angsty, but he's come out of that and he's now just a badass sarcastic motherfucker. It's a shame that a new game seems pretty unlikely to happen. You've heard that I've got some complaints about this game, but it does so much more to set up a world and a lore that I want to see more of. Maybe with a sequel they would have got some of the writing quirks under control. Hellblade is incredibly well written, and maybe the next DMC could have been. It did so much that could have been set up into something with style and maybe even substance, but a sequel is probably a long time away. That has been my thoughts on Ninja Theory's DMC. My name is Billy, for Diginauts, peace.